There are days when you walk away from certain people and feel something heavy sitting quietly on your chest, not because of what was said, but because of the energy they left behind. You try to shake it off, but it lingers. A tone, a comment, a look that felt sharper than it needed to be. And you start wondering why some people affect you so deeply, while others don't touch your peace at all. This episode isn't about blaming anyone. It's about understanding what happens inside you when someone toxic steps into your space, and how you can protect the parts of yourself that deserve calm, clarity, and stability. Stoicism offers a way to do that, not by fighting people, not by changing them, but by learning how to stay centered no matter what comes toward you. So let's slow down for a moment, just you and me, and take a quiet walk through this together. No pressure, no expectations, just a clearer way to see yourself, and a clearer way to see the people who try to pull you away from your own peace. Let's begin. 1. See their behavior as a reflection of them, not you. What becomes striking once you slow down enough to really observe people is how often their reactions have nothing to do with you at all. Their tone, their impatience, their coldness, their unpredictability, these things don't rise from your actions, but from their own unresolved worlds. Yet for years, maybe without even realizing it, you've carried other people's emotional storms as if they were weather patterns you caused. You replay conversations, analyze their words, wonder what you could have said differently, all because their behavior felt personal. But the truth, the liberating, grounding truth, is that most of what people express is simply a reflection of the state they're in, not a statement about who you are. Think of someone who raises their voice at you unexpectedly. Your first instinct might be self-blame. Did I trigger something? But if you look deeper, you'll often find the frustration was already in them long before you arrived. You were just the nearest surface for their emotions to land on. And once you understand this, you begin separating your identity from their reactions. You stop letting their moods shape your self-worth. You recognize that someone who is drowning will splash water on everyone near them, not because you deserve it, but because that's what drowning people do. Stoicism teaches this clarity beautifully. It reminds you that your judgment of events, not the events themselves, determines how deeply they cut. When someone speaks harshly, the pain doesn't come from their words alone. It comes from believing those words are about you. But what if they aren't? What if that harshness is just the echo of a long internal struggle they never resolved? What if the criticism they throw at you is the same one they fight inside themselves every night? Suddenly, the emotional weight shifts away from your heart and returns to its rightful place, in theirs. You can see this clearly when you start noticing patterns. A person who criticizes everything eventually criticizes you, no matter how kind or careful you are. A person who avoids responsibility will blame you even for things outside your control. A person who lives with resentment will find a reason to feel wronged by you, even when you've done nothing. These patterns reveal more about their world than yours. And once you understand that, you stop absorbing their negativity the way a sponge absorbs water. You start becoming impermeable. Imagine going through your day with that shift fully alive in you. Someone gives you an irritated look, and instead of feeling small, you think, they must be carrying something heavy today. Someone speaks rudely, and instead of shrinking inward, you see clearly that their tone reflects inner turmoil, not your value. Suddenly, the emotional battlefield becomes visible, and you realize you don't have to walk into it. And here's what's truly interesting. The moment you stop taking their behavior personally, you begin responding differently. Your face stays relaxed, your voice remains steady, your nervous system doesn't jump into survival mode. You stop matching their intensity, and as a result, the interaction loses its power to drain you. You're no longer participating in their emotional script, you're simply witnessing it. This perspective doesn't mean you excuse their behavior. It doesn't mean you accept disrespect. It simply means you stop letting their behavior define you. You stop letting it enter the deeper parts of your identity. You realize that you don't have to carry someone else's emotional baggage just because they set it down in front of you. And when this clarity settles into your life, not as an idea, but as a lived experience, something important begins to unfold. You start feeling a sense of emotional distance that protects you effortlessly. You become less reactive, less shaken, less easily influenced by the moods and intentions of others. Their storms remain theirs. Your peace remains yours. And that quiet shift naturally opens the door to something even more powerful, the ability to stay emotionally steady, even when someone is trying to pull you into their chaos. A skill the Stoics refined into an art, and one that forms the heart of the next insight. 2. Stay emotionally neutral, the Stoic shield. What often surprises people when they begin practicing emotional awareness is how quickly a situation can change the moment they choose not to react. Not because the other person suddenly becomes kind or reasonable, but because neutrality removes the fuel that toxic behavior depends on. Emotional neutrality is not coldness. It's not indifference. It's the quiet discipline of staying centered when someone is intentionally or unconsciously trying to pull you off balance. And if there is one thing toxic individuals rely on, it's your reaction. They thrive on emotional responses. They need it to feel powerful, to feel justified, to feel in control. But the moment you remain neutral, almost effortlessly calm, the entire dynamic shifts. You've probably experienced this before without naming it. Someone raises their voice, expecting you to match their intensity. Someone criticizes you sharply, waiting for you to defend yourself. Someone throws a passive-aggressive comment, hoping you'll absorb the sting. And when you don't, when you breathe before speaking, when your tone stays even, when your face remains composed, their strategy falters. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't emotionally submit. Stoic neutrality isn't about denying your feelings. It's about choosing the timing and expression of your response instead of letting it spill out impulsively. It's the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is immediate, fueled by emotion. A response is deliberate, fueled by clarity. And clarity only comes when your nervous system is steady enough to think rather than to fight. Consider how many arguments in your life escalated because both sides were reacting instead of observing. Toxic people count on this escalation. It gives them leverage, gives them an emotional advantage, makes them feel they've pulled you into their world. But neutrality keeps you in your own world. It creates a psychological buffer that protects your peace, your dignity, and your ability to see the situation without distortion. One of the simplest ways to practice emotional neutrality is through pausing. That small pause, even half a second, interrupts the automatic emotional cycle. It gives your mind space to evaluate what's really happening. Is this about me? Is this worth my energy? Is there any benefit to matching their tone? Most of the time, the answer is no, and when you realize that, the urgency to engage dissolves. You find yourself speaking more slowly, choosing words more intentionally, refusing to match the emotional chaos coming toward you. Your body relaxes even while the other person remains tense. Your mind stays clear, even while theirs is clouded. And slowly, almost quietly, the dynamic shifts in your favor. Toxic individuals often become frustrated when they can't provoke you. They rely on emotional disruption to feel dominant or validated. When you remain neutral, they lose their anchor. Their words begin to feel hollow. Their attempts at manipulation become transparent, and the emotional control they once had over you disappears. They may even escalate briefly, searching for some reaction to cling to. But if you hold your center, their escalation eventually collapses under its own weight. Neutrality doesn't mean you tolerate mistreatment. It simply means you refuse to engage in emotional warfare. You respond from a place of strength, not from woundedness. You choose your battles based on principle, not impulse. And, ironically, the more neutral you become, the clearer your boundaries grow, because you're no longer blinded by emotional reactivity. Another benefit of neutrality is the clarity it gives you about who someone really is. When your emotions are quiet, your perception sharpens. You begin noticing subtleties, tone shifts, contradictions, patterns of behavior. You see the insecurity behind the aggression, the fear behind the arrogance, the chaos behind the cruelty. Not to excuse them, but to understand what you're truly dealing with. And that understanding leads to a profound shift. You stop participating in pointless battles. You stop defending yourself against accusations that aren't grounded in truth. You stop wasting time trying to convince someone who isn't listening. Instead, you conserve your energy for things that matter, for conversations grounded in respect, for relationships built on reciprocity, for interactions that uplift rather than deplete. And once neutrality becomes part of your emotional identity, you naturally begin to see the next layer of wisdom. Not every conversation deserves your presence, and not every person is capable of having a rational exchange, which is where the next truth begins to take shape. The deep understanding that arguing with irrational people is one of the fastest ways to lose your peace. 3. Do not argue with irrational people. There's a certain fatigue that settles into you when you try to reason with someone who isn't rooted in reason at all. It's not the fatigue of conversation. It's the fatigue of trying to hold on to clarity while the other person twists every word, bends every truth, and shifts the goalposts so many times that you eventually lose sight of what you were defending in the first place. And this is where Stoicism offers one of its most practical teachings. You do not owe your energy to battles that cannot be won, because the other person isn't fighting for truth. They're fighting for dominance, control, or emotional release. You've probably noticed how these interactions feel in your body. Your heart rate rises, your chest tightens, your thoughts begin racing. You start responding faster, with more emotion, as if you're trying to outrun the chaos of the conversation. But no matter how clearly you speak, no matter how calmly you try to explain, the irrational person doesn't hear you. Not because your words lack logic, but because their mind is not searching for logic. They are searching for emotional victory. They want the last word, the upper hand, the sense that they've pulled you into the emotional arena they control. But here's the shift that changes everything. You don't have to enter that arena. The moment you realize that arguing with someone who is committed to misunderstanding you is a form of self-betrayal, something inside you begins to settle. You stop explaining yourself to those who twist explanations. You stop clarifying your intentions to those who delight in misinterpreting them. You stop trying to bring light to someone who keeps closing their eyes. And when you refuse to argue, the dynamic collapses. Irrational people expect resistance. They thrive on it. They know how to escalate, how to spin things, how to use your reactions as evidence against you. but they are completely unprepared for someone who opts out, someone who remains calm, someone who simply says, "I'm not continuing this conversation," and means it. Someone who chooses their peace over the performance of debate. This isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. It's the realization that your energy is finite, and giving it to people who weaponize your words is a cost you no longer accept. It protects your dignity, your sanity, and your emotional balance. Every argument you refuse saves you hours of rumination later. Every conversation you step away from early prevents the emotional spiral that usually follows. There's another layer to this. When you stop arguing, you reveal the truth of the situation more clearly than any debate ever could. Your silence exposes their instability. Your calmness reveals the intensity of their chaos. Your refusal to engage forces them to confront their own behavior without the distraction of your reaction. It's a mirror they didn't expect to see. And something almost predictable happens with time. They lose interest. People who thrive on chaos crave emotional feedback. When they don't get it from you, when your neutrality becomes consistent, they eventually look elsewhere for the reaction they need. You become someone they cannot manipulate, cannot unsettle, cannot pull into conflict, and that is a quiet form of power. What's even more significant is how this discipline prepares you for something deeper. Once you stop giving your energy to irrational people, you naturally begin investing that same energy into understanding yourself. Your triggers, your boundaries, your emotional patterns. You have space to think, to reflect, to choose. And from that space comes the next insight, one that gives you even more control. Learning to shape your emotional responses intentionally, instead of letting them be shaped by someone else's behavior. 4. Control what you can. Your response. What no one tells you early in life is how much of your emotional suffering comes from trying to control the one thing you never truly can: how people choose to behave. You can be thoughtful, patient, respectful, and still find yourself face to face with someone who speaks carelessly or reacts irrationally. And for a long time, you may believe that if you could just explain yourself better, stay calmer, or try harder, the other person would meet you halfway. But the turning point, the one that shifts your entire relationship with conflict, is realizing that your power has never lived outside you. It has always been in the one thing you can shape with absolute mastery: your response. There's a quiet strength that begins to grow the moment you stop reacting automatically. When someone says something sharp, your old instinct might push you to defend yourself immediately, to fill the silence, to justify, to match their intensity. But imagine pausing instead, not to suppress your feelings, but to give them space to settle. That pause is where your freedom begins. In that space, you choose whether this person deserves an explanation, whether this moment requires your energy, whether your peace is worth more than winning a point in an argument that doesn't matter hours later. Stoic thinkers wrote about this constantly, the gap between what happens to you and what you choose to do next. Most people live as if that gap doesn't exist. They let others pull their emotional strings, let tone dictate tone, let disrespect dictate reaction. But the moment you recognize that gap, the moment you step into it consciously, the dynamic of your entire life changes. Because now you're no longer operating on instinct, you're operating on intention. And here's the surprising part. Controlling your response doesn't make you passive. It doesn't make you weak. It actually strengthens your position. When your voice stays steady, when your posture remains relaxed, when your breath stays slow while the other person rushes through their own emotions, you communicate something powerful without saying it outright. I am not under your control. I will not be shaped by your chaos. People feel that. They sense when they no longer have emotional access to you, and suddenly the weight of their behavior returns to them instead of settling on you. This is especially true with those who try to provoke you. Nothing confuses a toxic person more than someone who refuses to give them the emotional reaction they're reaching for. When your response is calm, measured, intentional, their strategy loses direction. They expect fire. They collide with stillness instead. They expect defensiveness. They meet clarity. They expect escalation. They find someone who refuses to stand in the flames with them. And here's where things deepen. Controlling your response isn't just about dealing with others. It's about reshaping your relationship with yourself. Every time you choose your reaction instead of giving it away, you reinforce to your own mind, my peace belongs to me. You begin trusting yourself more. You begin believing in your own emotional stability. You stop seeing yourself as someone who gets dragged into conflict and start seeing yourself as someone who chooses how far they'll go. And something remarkable happens with time. Situations that once triggered you stop having the same impact. People who once intimidated you lose their power. Conversations that once left you drained now pass through you like wind instead of storms. You feel heavier in your presence and lighter in your reactions. You carry yourself differently, not with tension, but with a kind of groundedness that others notice even before you speak. And as this steadiness builds inside you, another truth starts to reveal itself, a truth that becomes the natural continuation of this journey. Because once you learn to choose your response, you begin to realize that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. The next insight grows from this recognition, the quiet art of using silence as a form of strength rather than surrender. 5. Use strategic silence. There are moments when speaking won't bring clarity, won't calm the situation, won't lead anyone toward understanding. In fact, there are moments when words only tighten the knot. And if you've ever found yourself explaining something for the 5th time, or defending yourself against a twisting, shifting argument, or trying to reason with someone who isn't actually listening, then you already know this truth. Not every moment deserves your voice. Some moments deserve your silence. Not the silence of fear or avoidance, but the silence of someone who refuses to participate in a conversation that harms their peace. Strategic silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. People often imagine silence as withdrawal, defeat, or emotional shutdown. But the Stoics saw it differently. They saw silence as a form of presence, a calm refusal to be moved by someone else's chaos. When you choose silence intentionally, you aren't retreating. You are staying exactly where you stand, without being dragged into someone else's emotional storm. Think of a time when someone tried to provoke you. Maybe they spoke over you. Maybe they mocked something important to you. Maybe they brought up an old wound just to see how you would react. The instinctive response might be to jump in, defend yourself, or correct their version of events. But imagine, just for a moment, that instead of reacting, you simply stay quiet. You look at them, you breathe, and you let the weight of their words hang in the air without touching you. It's strange how silence can unsettle someone far more than anger ever could. Toxic people depend on your reaction. They need your energy, your emotional spark, your engagement. When you withhold that, calmly, intentionally, you break the cycle they rely on. They expect fire and receive a still lake instead. They expect resistance and collide with calm. They expect you to lose control, but you remain grounded. And in that contrast, their behavior suddenly looks exactly what it is: unsteady, misplaced, disproportionate. Silence creates a mirror. It reflects their behavior back to them with surprising clarity. When you stop feeding the conflict, they are forced to sit with their own words, their own tone, their own choices. Many people cannot tolerate that reflection. They may ramp up the drama, speak louder, try harder to pull you in. But if your silence remains intentional and steady, their escalation eventually burns itself out. They run out of fuel because you did not hand them any. Strategic silence also gives you something invaluable: space. Space to think before reacting. Space to ask yourself whether this person deserves a response. Space to understand the true intention behind their words. Silence slows down time in a way that lets you choose clarity over impulse. It protects you from saying things you would regret, from being pulled into explanations that go nowhere, from defending yourself against accusations not rooted in truth. And there's another layer to this. Silence teaches people how to treat you. When you don't respond to disrespect, manipulation, or emotional bait, you communicate a boundary without saying, "This is my boundary." The lack of reaction becomes the message. You are not available for emotional sparring. You are not accessible for chaos. You do not reward bad behavior with attention, energy, or explanations. Over time, people learn, some consciously, some unconsciously, that if they want access to your voice, they must approach you with respect. But what makes silence truly powerful is what it does inside you. When you practice it consistently, you begin to feel your emotional center strengthening. You realize you don't need to fix every misunderstanding. You don't need to correct every false assumption. You don't need to fight every battle presented to you. Silence teaches you to trust your own inner equilibrium more than the noise around you. And as this inner strength grows, another truth becomes clearer. Silence is powerful, but it becomes even more meaningful when supported by boundaries that don't require explanation or apology. Because sooner or later you'll realize that staying silent is only one part of protecting your peace. The other part is choosing who gets close to you in the first place. A truth that begins to reveal itself in the next insight, where clarity becomes action and protection becomes something you no longer postpone. 6. Set boundaries without apology. What becomes clearer the more you deal with difficult people is that peace isn't something you stumble into. It's something you defend, and one of the most powerful ways you defend it is by learning to set boundaries without guilt, without over-explaining, and without apologizing for needing space, respect, or emotional safety. Many people hesitate to set boundaries because they fear being misunderstood, disliked, or labeled as selfish. But the reality is far simpler. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries are the only ones who get upset when you finally create them. A boundary is not a wall between you and others. It's a door that you choose when to open and when not to, depending on how the other person treats the space you share. It's you saying, "This is how close I allow you to get. This is how I expect to be spoken to. This is what I will not participate in." And you don't need to justify any of this. You are not required to defend your need for emotional stability. Think about how often you've softened your voice, reshaped your truth, or tolerated discomfort just to avoid conflict. How many times you've said yes while your body was saying no. How often you've allowed someone to cross a line because you didn't want to seem too sensitive or difficult. Those moments accumulate. They chip away at your self-respect, one interaction at a time. Eventually, you start feeling small in situations where you once felt strong. But the moment you begin setting boundaries, calmly, clearly, consistently, something shifts. You stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. You stop shrinking so others can feel bigger. You stop allowing your silence to be mistaken for acceptance. And what's interesting is that boundaries don't just protect you from others. They protect you from becoming the version of yourself that you no longer want to be. The version that tolerates too much, speaks too little, and carries emotional burdens that were never yours. A boundary doesn't require harshness. You don't need to raise your voice, threaten, or push others away. A boundary can be as simple as, "I won't continue this conversation in this tone. I'm not available for this right now. That doesn't work for me. I prefer something else. I'm stepping away from this situation." Short, steady, clear. No explanations. No emotional unraveling. No guilt. Because here's the truth. The more you explain your boundary, the more you invite negotiation from someone who has already shown they don't respect your comfort. Toxic people don't hear explanations. They hear opportunities to shift blame, minimize your needs, or pull you back into patterns that drain you. That's why clarity without apology is essential. You may notice that once you start setting boundaries, some people pull away. Let them. Their departure is not a loss. It's a natural response to losing unearned access to your energy. Healthy people won't be threatened by your boundaries. They'll be relieved by them. They'll know how to meet you halfway. They'll respect the space you need, and they'll feel safer setting their own. And there's something else boundaries do quietly. They reveal intentions. When you tell someone no, their reaction tells you everything about the relationship. If they respect your limit, they value you. If they push against it, they value what they get from you. That distinction alone can save you years of confusion. With time, setting boundaries becomes less about managing others and more about honoring yourself. You begin listening to your discomfort instead of suppressing it. You trust the signals your body gives you when something feels wrong. You stop asking for permission to protect your peace. You stop apologizing for needing space. And slowly, you become someone who stands firmly in their own presence. Someone who knows what they allow, what they reject, and what they refuse to carry. And as you grow more confident in drawing these lines, another realization emerges almost naturally. It is not your responsibility, nor your mission, to fix or rescue people who refuse to fix or rescue themselves. That truth, gentle but liberating, opens the way to the next insight, where you finally release the burden of trying to heal those who only drain you. 7. Stop trying to fix or save toxic people. What becomes painfully clear the longer you move through life is that some of the exhaustion you carry isn't from what people did to you, but from what you kept trying to do for them. The effort, the compassion, the explaining, the hoping that maybe, just maybe, if you understood them deeply enough, loved them gently enough, supported them consistently enough, they would finally change. But there is a quiet truth that comes for all of us at some point. You cannot save someone who is committed to staying exactly where they are. There is a part of you that wants to believe that patience can heal someone's cruelty, that kindness can soften someone's manipulation, that your stability can calm someone's chaos. And that part of you is beautiful, but also vulnerable. Because toxic people don't change when you give more. They change only when they decide to confront themselves. And many people simply aren't ready for that confrontation. They aren't ready to acknowledge their patterns, their wounds, their responsibility. So instead, they cling to the comfort of repeating what they know, even if it hurts everyone around them. And when you stay too close for too long, you begin absorbing the weight of battles that aren't yours. You start feeling responsible for their moods, their reactions, their unhappiness. You start checking yourself constantly, adjusting your behavior, trying to prevent the next eruption. You tell yourself you're helping, but really you're losing pieces of yourself in the process. There is a moment, and you may have lived this, when you realize you've become the emotional anchor for someone who refuses to steady themselves. You listen to their complaints, their anger, their endless drama, hoping your presence will ground them. But nothing changes, because toxic people don't want grounding. They want attention. They want validation. They want to keep pouring the same story into your hands over and over without ever lifting themselves out of it. And the tragedy is that the more you give, the more they take. The more you try to help, the more they depend on being helpless. The more you try to bring clarity, the more they create confusion. Helping becomes enabling. Caring becomes self-neglect. Compassion becomes self-harm. But here's the shift that frees you. You are not responsible for someone's refusal to grow. You are not their therapist. You are not their healer. You are not the correction to their chaos. You are a person with your own life, your own emotional limits, your own peace to protect. When you stop trying to fix toxic people, you're not abandoning them. You're simply releasing the illusion that you ever had the power to change them in the first place. You return responsibility to where it belongs, their hands. And the moment you do, something inside you feels lighter. The constant emotional tension dissolves. The guilt fades. The pressure lifts. You reclaim the energy you've been giving away, one draining interaction at a time. And here's the insight that often arrives unexpectedly. Some people don't want solutions. They want cycles. They don't want healing. They want attention. They don't want responsibility. They want someone else to carry the consequences of their behavior. Once you understand this, you begin stepping back without anger. You begin saying no without guilt. You begin recognizing that helping someone who refuses to help themselves is not empathy, it is self-abandonment. And something else becomes possible: clarity. You begin to see where your effort ends and their choices begin. You start valuing your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth. You realize that your life can expand the moment you stop shrinking yourself to accommodate someone else's dysfunction. And with that clarity, a new kind of strength begins to surface. The strength to reduce access without reducing kindness. Because you don't need to be cruel to detach. You don't need to attack to step away. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for them and for yourself is to stop participating in the patterns that keep both of you stuck. And that realization naturally leads into the next understanding, that protecting your peace doesn't require shutting your heart, but simply choosing carefully who gets close enough to affect it. 8. Limit access, not kindness. There comes a point in your life when you realize that protecting your peace doesn't mean becoming hard or cold or distant. It doesn't mean shutting your heart or turning off your compassion. In fact, it means something much simpler, much quieter, and much wiser. You limit who has access to you. You limit how close certain people can get. You limit the parts of yourself you allow them to touch. And you do all of this without bitterness, without hostility, without trying to prove a point. You simply adjust the distance to match the reality of the person standing in front of you. It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. You stop trying to make certain relationships deeper than they can realistically be. You stop giving vulnerable parts of yourself to people who handle them carelessly. You stop allowing someone's negativity, unpredictability, or emotional instability to seep into the spaces of your life that should remain calm. You still treat them with basic respect, with decency, with the kind of humanity you choose to live by, but you no longer grant them the inner access they once had. And this is important. Limiting access is not punishment, it's protection. You are not cutting someone off to hurt them. You are stepping back to stop hurting yourself. Many people misunderstand kindness. They think kindness means openness without limits. They think being a good person means saying yes, listening endlessly, absorbing everything around them. But that's not kindness. That's self-neglect, wrapped in politeness. True kindness is sustainable only when it includes yourself. Only when you say, I can be warm, but I don't have to be available to everyone. I can be understanding, but I don't have to be emotionally accessible to those who drain me. You've probably experienced this shift already in small ways. You respond more slowly to messages that once pulled you in immediately. You keep your conversation shorter with people who always leave you feeling tired. You stop explaining personal things to those who use your vulnerability as material for criticism or gossip. Instead of trying to change these people, you simply offer them a version of yourself that protects your energy. A version that is polite, but not intimate. Present, but not exposed. And what's remarkable is how natural this becomes once you stop expecting every relationship to be deep or transformative. You begin to accept that different people deserve different distances. Some can sit with you in the quiet spaces of your life. Others belong at the edges. Some can share your thoughts, fears, and hopes. Others should only be granted small talk, surface-level conversation, and gentle boundaries. Not because you're superior, but because not everyone can be trusted with your interior world. A powerful shift happens when you embrace this truth. Access is earned, not given. Your time is valuable. Your emotional energy is finite. Your mind is not an open door for every passing storm. When you decide who gets close, who stays at arm's length, and who no longer belongs in your inner orbit, your life becomes calmer, lighter, more aligned. What's interesting is that the people who respect you will naturally adjust to this new distance without taking offense. They will understand that your boundaries are not walls. They're invitations to interact with clarity and respect. But the people who are benefiting from your lack of boundaries will notice the shift immediately. They may accuse you of being distant or cold. They may try to guilt you back into the old pattern. They may even test your limits. That reaction doesn't mean your adjustment is wrong. It means it was necessary. As you practice limiting access while maintaining kindness, something inside you begins to feel more grounded. You no longer carry the weight of trying to heal every person or fix every dynamic. You stop feeling responsible for how people interpret your distance. You stop bending yourself into shapes that fit someone else's comfort. You start honoring your own. And once this becomes part of your emotional rhythm, another realization begins to rise. Limiting access is powerful. But sometimes, the only real protection comes from stepping away entirely, which leads into the next insight. The ability to detach without resentment, to walk away when needed, and to reclaim your life without looking back. 9. Practice detachment and walk away when needed. There comes a moment, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, when you realize that staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. Not because you stopped caring, and not because you want to punish anyone, but because the version of you that keeps holding on is the version of you that keeps suffering. And this is where detachment becomes not an escape, but an evolution. A quiet, steady reclaiming of your life from situations and people who no longer align with who you're trying to become. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It doesn't mean you grow numb or indifferent. It means you stop gripping so tightly that your own hands begin to bleed. It means you stop tying your emotional well-being to the behavior of someone who has shown you repeatedly that they cannot meet you where you stand. It means you stop waiting for them to change, to apologize, to understand, to finally treat you with the softness you deserved from the beginning. There is a strength in walking away that no argument can match. It's the strength of saying, "My peace matters more than this pattern." It's the strength of letting the door close gently behind you without slamming it, without shouting, without trying to rewrite the past on your way out. It's the strength of choosing yourself, not loudly, but with a clarity that echoes longer than any explanation ever could. People often imagine detachment as a cold process, but in truth, it is deeply compassionate. It says, "I will not force myself to stay where my heart keeps breaking. I will not keep trying to fix what someone else keeps damaging. I will not abandon myself to hold together something that is falling apart by design." Detachment begins softly. You stop responding immediately. You stop over-explaining. You stop opening your heart to someone who treats it carelessly. You stop participating in arguments that go nowhere. You stop giving chances that only reopen the same wound. Little by little, you shift your energy inward. You gather yourself back from the places you scattered, trying to keep everything together. And then one day, the smallest thing pushes you into clarity. A comment, a moment, a feeling, and you realize this is the end of this chapter. Not with anger, not with resentment, just a deep, calm understanding that you have reached the edge of what you can give without losing yourself. Walking away is not dramatic. It is often quiet. It happens in the mind long before it happens in the world. The decision forms slowly. I deserve more than this chaos. I deserve reciprocity. I deserve a life where my nervous system isn't always on alert. And once that decision roots itself inside you, the physical act of leaving becomes a natural extension of your healing. But here's what people rarely talk about. When you walk away from someone toxic, you regain access to parts of yourself you didn't even know you had lost. Your creativity returns. Your sleep improves. Your laughter becomes fuller. Your thoughts feel clearer. You remember what peace feels like in your own body. You start rebuilding the inner world that the relationship or situation once made cloudy. Walking away doesn't just remove the person. It removes the version of you that tolerated what hurt you. And there's a quiet wisdom hidden inside detachment. You don't need to hate someone to walk away from them. You don't need a final fight. You don't need closure from their side. Sometimes the most mature exit is simply letting things go without burning bridges, without breaking anything, without turning your heart into stone. You just choose distance because distance is where your healing begins. And as you learn to walk away when needed, a final truth begins to rise. A truth that ties everything together. Because all these practices, seeing their behavior clearly, choosing neutrality, using silence, setting boundaries, limiting access, and detaching, ultimately lead to one central lesson. Your inner peace is not a luxury, it is your responsibility, and protecting it becomes the foundation of everything else. 10. Protect your inner peace as your highest duty. There comes a point in your growth where you begin to understand that peace is not something that appears out of nowhere. It is something you must choose, defend, and nurture every single day. And when you've lived through enough emotional storms caused by the wrong people, when you've tasted the exhaustion of carrying others' chaos, When you felt the slow erosion of your energy around those who drain you, a deeper truth rises. Your inner peace is not optional. It's essential. Protecting your peace is not about building walls. It's about building awareness. It's recognizing what your mind needs in order to function, what your heart needs in order to stay open, and what your energy needs in order to stay alive instead of depleted. It's understanding which conversations create clarity and which ones only create noise. It's knowing the difference between people who feed your nervous system with calm and those who keep it in a constant state of alertness. And here's something you learn the hard way. Toxic people are experts at making you doubt your right to peace. They tell you you're overreacting, too sensitive, too distant, too demanding, too quiet, too defensive, whatever label fits the moment. But their labels are nothing more than attempts to pull you back into a system where your peace is secondary to their comfort. The moment you begin valuing your peace more than their approval, the spell breaks. Their words lose weight. Their manipulation loses direction. Their chaos no longer penetrates your inner world the way it once did. Protecting your peace means choosing where your mind rests. It means leaving environments that make your body tense. It means saying no to conversations that always end the same way. It means stepping back from people who use your kindness as entry to take more than they give. It means understanding that distance is sometimes the most loving decision you can make, loving toward yourself. There is a kind of maturity that grows inside you when you learn to prioritize your peace. You become slower to react, slower to absorb negativity, slower to internalize someone's bad day as your responsibility. You begin living with intention rather than emotional reflex. You notice you're breathing more. You notice when your shoulders relax. You notice that clarity comes more often and confusion comes less. Peace becomes not something you chase, but something you create by choosing what and who you allow into your inner world. And what's beautiful is that when you protect your peace, the right people begin to gravitate toward you. The ones who respect emotional boundaries, the ones who speak with clarity instead of cruelty, the ones who don't see your calm as an invitation to take advantage, but as a sign of depth and maturity. Protecting your peace doesn't make your world smaller, it filters it. It reveals who truly deserves a seat at your table. And as you continue walking this path, you realize that every choice you've made, stepping back, staying neutral, setting boundaries, limiting access, walking away, has been leading you toward one truth. Peace is not something the world grants you. It's something you create through discipline, through clarity, through the courage to choose yourself even when it's uncomfortable. Because at the end of all these lessons, the core remains simple. Your inner peace is your responsibility. No one else will guard it for you. No one else will protect it. No one else will repair it when it breaks. And the life you want, the calm, the stability, the emotional strength, begins the moment you decide that preserving your peace is not a reaction to others, but a daily commitment to yourself. And with this understanding, your entire world begins to shift, not because others changed, but because you finally decided that your well-being is worth defending, and that decision becomes the quiet foundation on which every stronger, wiser, calmer version of you will stand. When you look back at the moments that shaped you, you'll notice something subtle. It was never the loud victories or the dramatic turning points that built your strength. It was the quiet decisions you made when no one was watching. The decision to stay calm, to step back, to protect your space, to walk away when staying would have cost you pieces of yourself. And maybe no one clapped for you in those moments, No one praised the emotional discipline it took. No one saw the battle happening inside you, but you felt it. You knew you were choosing the version of yourself you wanted to grow into. And what you've learned here is not about dealing with toxic people. Not really. It's about reclaiming something far more important: the authority over your inner world, the ability to decide what gets in and what stays out. The freedom to choose calm over chaos, clarity over confusion, and dignity over emotional exhaustion. Because at the end of it all, life doesn't reward the one who shouts the loudest or fights the hardest. Life rewards the one who knows how to protect their peace in a world that constantly tries to steal it. And the moment you begin treating your inner peace as something sacred, something worth defending, you start to reshape everything around you: who you allow close, how you communicate, what you tolerate, and who you become. So take a breath, let this settle, and carry this truth with you into every room, every conversation, every choice. Your peace is your strength, and protecting it is your greatest responsibility. If this episode gave you something to think about, something to feel, something to carry forward, then stay close. There's more to learn and more of yourself to reclaim.